Welcome to the Indomitable podcast. I'm your host, Di Cerullo, and today we have another great episode that will leave you inspired. My guest today is the indomitable Rita Bliven. Rita is an author, blogger, and kidnapping survivor. Her upcoming memoir, Canyons and Fireworks, delves into her unique story and identifying and healing her avoidant attachment style. Well, hello, Rita. I am so grateful to have you here.
Hi, Di. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I can't wait for this conversation. Before we begin, tell us how we got to this place.
So pretty much as soon as I was born, my parents, their marriage fell apart. And my dad was a Mexican immigrant from Mexico. And my mom was from Pennsylvania, but living in California. So that's where they met and fell in love. And it was the early 80s. And so when they started their divorce proceedings, my father feared that he wouldn't have any custody rights against a full citizen. So he took me to Mexico. And that's where I stayed for the next 2 years. And I learned Spanish as my first language. And then when I was 3 years old, my mom got me back.
Wow. What was that process like?
As you can imagine, as a mother, having your baby taken away from you is pretty traumatic. And so it was very difficult on my mom. She spent the next 2 years trying to find me, trying to get private investigators involved, trying to get the law enforcement involved. But they said that because he was my biological father, he had the right to do that. That has all changed. It's no longer like that anymore. But in the early 80s, there were just other issues going on that were more pressing. And so when my mom got me back, she went back to her hometown in Pennsylvania and changed my name, severed all ties with my father and his side of the family. And so I basically say I was kidnapped twice. I was, kidnapped from my mom and taken to Mexico. And then my mom got me back, which was, the right thing for her to do. But at the same time, I had bonded with my father and my big Mexican family, and Mexico was my home and Spanish was my language. And and she took me to Pennsylvania where no one spoke any Spanish except for her. She spoke some Spanish, but it was broken Spanish at that point.
How did that feel? I get that you don't remember much of it, but I suppose that would feel like you'd been taken to a new world, like a new planet. Do you have any memories of that time?
So that's the thing. Even though I don't remember being taken or being in Mexico or any of that, my earliest memories are about at the age of 3 years old. And knowing I'm in a new place with new people that don't look like me, and I'm learning English.
Right.
And so even though I didn't really have the backstory, I did have the backstory, but I couldn't cognitively grasp the backstory. I was grasping the fact that I was different, somewhere new, and I was learning English, and no one else my age was having to learn a new language. As any foreigner who learns a language, not in a classroom, but just by submersion, you focus on people's lips and you repeat what they say over and over again in your head, and you focus on all the other cues that are available. And so that made me, apart from everything else, it also made me extremely sensitive and made me super aware of what was going on with other people as a form of communication, but I was less aware of what was going on with me.
Right. So you became a practiced face reader then?
Yeah, pretty much.
So for myself as an ADHDer, people who are neurodivergent, especially autistic folks, we become practiced face readers, and thus we experience higher than average rejection sensitivity dysphoria or disorder, however we like. Would you say that you also experienced high levels of perceived rejection in your upbringing as well?
Yes and no. So because I could follow or respond to people's cues, everybody liked me.
Oh,
because I was that person that could tell, they looked over there, they're at that glass of water, they're thirsty, they want it. So it's kind of like people pleasing on steroids.
Right.
I guess you could say, when you're just trying to understand everyone around you and to find your place in the world, and yet you're putting your emotions and needs on the back burner. So I always was hyper accepted, but I knew it was because of the things I was doing.
Right.
It didn't really give me a feeling of belonging. I write about it in my book. I was one of those kids that every time I visited a friend's house, I was immediately accepted into the family. And we all have those stories of our best friend that we've spent umpteen hours at their house. And after several years, you become like a cousin or,
Yes.
But it would happen for me instantly. And I think there's two reasons behind that. I think reason number one is because I was the kid that picked up after myself and cleaned and was very polite because I wanted everybody to like me because I needed it to survive. I felt alone in the world. But also because I have failed attachment, I sort of emulated adoptability. I am not in a family, even though I didn't feel like I was in a family. And so a lot of families invited me into their home really out of charity.
Yeah.
So I had hyper acceptance, but no true belonging.
Would you say that made you feel like you had to people please forever so that you could continue to be accepted?
Yes. I've been in therapy forever. And so
I've done. That's the baseline, everybody. Therapy forever.
Therapy forever. I'm still in therapy. Even though the outward expression probably looked exactly the same as people pleasing, my motive was different. It was more so, I'm going to do these things so I have control of the environment around me. I'm going to make this person happy so that they're an ally, which I know sounds like people pleasing, but it was more for me centered in, I'm going to take care of myself.
Right.
And in order to take care of myself, I need all of these allies. Now, as a child, could I articulate that? Absolutely not.
Right.
But it was less about people pleasing and more about I have to take care of everything and I have to meet my own needs. So that's more so what I have had to deal with in my inner healing.
Right. So you're not even talking about people pleasing. You're talking about 3 different versions of this. So like eldest daughter syndrome. You're talking about so people pleasing is this. What you're talking about is way up here. So this is for survival. This is for, that's amazing. So you are masking and performing at a high level for survivability. How would you say that impacted your relationship?
Oh, it's terrible. So the definition of avoidant attachment is that you fear intimacy and that you feel that you're going to be suffocated in relationships or lose yourself in relationships. And so you have to have these super fortified walls of self-protection, emotional and inner self-protection up at all times. So you can imagine that does not make for the deepest, soul healing kind of relationships that we all need.
Right.
But again, I fit in and I was accepted, but I didn't have the intimacy that goes, and you can't have intimacy with everybody,
No, of course.
But you need some of those key relationships where you're able to be authentic and transparent. And I didn't have that, not because I didn't have loving people in my life. I didn't have that because of myself, because of the internal walls going on inside of me.
That must have been so hard to overcome between childhood and sort of when you are becoming a teenager and when you are starting to have more, supposedly intimate relationships. What I did was, as soon as I started dating and having more intimate relationships with people, I immediately chose toxic relationships, right? Did you, like me, also choose really terrible relationships for you?
Yes. And I also was terrible. So the thing with avoidant attachment is that, you're not a bad person. Same with anxious attachment. You're not a bad person.
Right.
Your love receiver's broken.
Right.
That's what it is. And so as a human, you get lonely. And as a human, you know instinctively that you need connection. And so you go after that. But then once you get it, you immediately shut down, or you immediately push the person away, or you immediately do something to sabotage. So I was awful. I was a ghoster before the term ghosting was invented. So I was awful in that regard. But there was also that little part of me that was attracted to the people that weren't truly emotionally available. Because I was not emotionally available either. And so there was that little part of me that worked for.
Right.
And so, yes, there were some toxic relationships there. And then the other side of it, people with avoidant attachment are sometimes attracted to people with anxious attachment. It's kind of like the codependent relationship. You're extremes and you feed off of each other. And
Right.
so, healthy attachment, you should have a secure sense of self and a secure foundation of love. And you
Right.
should be able to put yourself out there in loving relationships and be able to move past a certain level of rejection.
Right.
With avoidant attachment, you're not comfortable with intimacy. You feel suffocated in relationships. And with anxious attachment, you are desperate to get your love needs met. And you barrel through any boundaries that anyone has and you demand to be loved. Well, you can understand how at first that might be refreshing for someone with avoidant attachment. Because it's like, oh, I push everyone away, but I pushed you away, but that didn't stop you.
Right.
You came after me anyway. And at first that's like, oh, this is what I need. Well, they're both unhealthy, just on different ends. And so later on in the relationship, those things become issues.
Of course.
So yeah, that's how my teens and 20s relationships were unhealthy.
Yep. Samesies. I did much the same. Where I very much thought, because I had never been loved, that like, oh my gosh, this person wants to love. That's incredible. This is amazing. Oh my gosh, this is the first time I'm whatever, movies and media have filled your head with. And you're like, oh, it must be, this is my person. And then just over and over again, when you're getting into these sort of abusive situations, you are gaslighting yourself and saying, oh, no, I should give him another chance, or, oh, he's sorry, or whatever. And like, if I could talk to my teenage self, if I could talk to my 20-year-old self, what would you say if you could talk to yourself at that age?
I love what you just said, that you're gaslighting yourself. And that is something I had to deal with big time in avoidant attachment.
Yes.
Is that you shut down your own needs. You know that your needs haven't been met in the past.
Yes.
And you hate that you have needs. And so instead of, getting your needs met in a healthy way, you try to shut it down completely.
Of course.
When you shut it down repeatedly, you end up gaslighting yourself. Now, this has not been my experience, but just from learning about attachment, the anxious attachment person does the opposite. They're attracted to usually toxic people, and they have all the red flags, and they know they're red flags, but they're so desperate to be loved, they just shut that down. And so I would say to my younger self, listen to yourself.
Right.
Listen to yourself. Don't always act on what you're thinking or feeling. Hear what you're thinking and feeling. Feel what you're feeling. And I think that would have been a stronger foundation to go into therapy more effectively. Because I spent years in therapy just learning how to hear myself, learning how to connect with myself. I probably still would have made all the same mistakes, but I probably would have had a stronger foundation to be more successful in therapy quicker.
That is so true. If I could go back, and I think what I will teach my children in the future is just not to abandon yourself, right? Like, you don't need to abandon yourself or your beliefs or your self-love. Anybody who would ask you to push your boundaries or abandon yourself or abandon your values, all of those people are not going to be the person. Right here, right now, that's not the person. Anybody that loves you wants to see you strong, wants to see you empowered. They don't want to see you weak. They don't want to see you pushed down. They don't want to see you removed from all your family members. We aren't teaching people right when it comes to relationships. And that is one of the things that I still struggle with. I'm hoping that the more therapy sort of seeps into the culture, the better and better it will get. Don't go back and watch your favorite, romantic films. You will not be excited about what you were taught. You won't want to watch them with your own kids. It's not great. It's not great.
Agreed.
So what made you write the book?
So I got my mom, the genius, the progressive genius that she is. She got me in therapy, and this was the 90s.
Right.
In Western Pennsylvania. She was a teacher, so she didn't have, just bukus of money. But she got me into professional Christian counseling when I was like 13, 14 years old. I learned that it was okay to invest in my own mental and emotional health. That was the big lesson that I learned. And so then when I got into my adult life, it was an easy transition for me to get into therapy. And I've been in therapy my entire life, since 13 or 14. Same. And there have been multiple levels of healing. It wasn't just, I was in therapy for 6 months. I've had all these revelations. I'm good now. No. There were years and multiple steps. And there was just no resource out there at the time. You know, when I would hear about attachment theory in the, early 2000s, I was the only one talking about it. There was nobody else talking about it. And so now that I'm on the other side of a lot of healing, which it's a lifelong journey, it's not over. It's not over. But I will say for someone with avoidant attachment disorder, it's a pretty big milestone to be connected to both sides of your family and to be in a loving community of friends and to be married in a healthy relationship. During the pandemic, I just sort of had that aha moment that I was on the other side. And I think also I missed a few counseling sessions just because of the pandemic and everything shut down. I validated within myself that I was on the other side of a lot of hurt,
Right.
And then it just instantly became about helping others. There were doctors and researchers talking about attachment theory, but nobody
from the outside.
Nobody who had gone through it and experienced the hurt and the trauma and having to make these scary life choices on the basis of working on my attachment. And I just wanted to be a resource for others.
That is so smart. It's not easy to sit yourself down and examine the things that you've gone through. And you're right, you need to be at a specific point, or at least past a specific point in your own sort of healing journey before you're going to be able to do that, right? So that's definitely an important part of the journey. When we have outsiders, not necessarily even people who, not even necessarily like doctors or whatever, right? But like people who are on the outside of the experience describing the experiences of the person on the inside, it always seems to go through a different lens for me, right? It always seems to go through that, almost like a game of telephone. If you tell somebody something and they've heard, do you know what I mean? And they've heard it one way, but it still has to pass through their lens of being non-impacted. So they're going to sort of say it to other people in a rather different way than how you've said it. So if I, as a child who grew up in foster care, if I'm talking about child abuse, for example, I am saying, this is the issue, this is the problem, this is what needs to be fixed. Sometimes it'll pass through a lens of institutionalism, and what they will spit back is, oh, nobody needs to hear about this. And it's like, that's not quite what I said, is it? You know what I mean? So it feels like when you are telling your story from the impacted identity perspective, a lot of times you will be tripping over other people's lenses. And that was at least my experience. I thought I would get a lot more pushback. I felt like when I wrote my story, I would just have a series of haters who hated everything and wanted to yell at me about it. And instead, what I was going through was the experience of people not wanting to talk about child abuse, not wanting to talk about foster care, not wanting to talk about any of these things. I grew up thinking, someday I'll tell this story and then they'll know. But then when I got here as an adult, people already know, right? They're not really looking to hear the details of it. They are just content with not having had it happen to them.
There are some people that are just not going to be interested in this story.
Of course.
On any level. There are some people that are interested in the dramatic elements of the story, being taken to Mexico, learning English as your first language, even though you're an American citizen. But that's really where the interest ends, and they're not really concerned with the implications of those actions. They just like the story.
Right.
The few people that are interested immediately are, my people. They're the people that while I'm talking say, oh my goodness, this explains why my fiance that I was in love with dumped me, 3 weeks before the wedding. This explains why I knew that my father loved me, but I never felt any warmth from him. And, they're the people that, immediately start relating, even though their stories are nothing like mine.
Right.
Nothing like mine. My story is dramatic. And so it paints a clearer picture of how much attachment can affect your life. But we all need a healthy attachment. We all need that foundation of love early on in life as a building block for the development of our personality and our intellect, all of it. So we all experience attachment. And so it's super refreshing for me to connect with people who can see where their attachment or the attachment of a loved one has been altered. Maybe it wasn't completely unhealthy to the level of disorder, but it was altered enough to impact daily life. And And I think that's what's so important. I know your mission is so different, but mine is this affects everyone, even if you weren't kidnapped.
Yes.
I will say I have a heart for the foster community. I guess when you're a little different, you attract different people.
Yes.
So I always was friends with, the one gay guy in school,
Of course.
the one adopted girl, the one foster kid. I was that person that was always friends with those people. And I always say it's because all of our attachment had been disrupted. But it
Right.
was also because we were just different. We didn't have the two-parent home, the white picket fence.
Right.
Our parents didn't pay for our college tuition.
No.
All of that stuff that just, we think of as the American dream. So we sort of, flocked together. And so I have always seen the correlation between attachment and foster kids. I mean, my early life mimicked that of a foster child.
Yes.
I was taken from a home, put in another home, bonded with that family, and then was taken again.
Yes.
And I realized the statistics with foster children are much worse than that. I think it's something you probably know better than me, like 7 or 8 homes by the time you're 12, or maybe I have that backwards, 12 homes by the time you're 7 or 8. I've read statistics over the years, and so I know it's more dramatic, but I have always had a heart for the foster community, and I just can't be a resource for them. If you are not a foster kid or a foster parent, the foster community does not really want to hear from you.
Right.
At least that's been my experience so far. And it's really disheartening for me because I feel like just as far as the general public is concerned, the foster care system could really benefit from healthy attachment education.
Yes. I mean, having attachment issues is one of the primary issues that foster kids are dealing with. And that's something that they diagnose you with very early. And that's something that you are carrying with you from home to home. I think your work absolutely belongs in the foster care system. The problem I see in our community is that we have so much gatekeeping around who can speak, whose voice it is. And so we have adoptees who will come in and they will have their specific viewpoint, and then foster kids who will have their specific viewpoint. But I think that this is an issue of community building. I can't imagine just saying, oh no, Rita, sorry, we'd like to continue to suffer for as long as we can without the impact of your work. I think that that's really interesting though, because again, this gatekeeping exists to keep communities from building relationships with each other. And it is not just foster care and former foster care youth. I see the same thing happening around building community around neurodiversity. So ADHDers, autistics, all of those folks. I will regularly have people in my comments saying, well, you don't speak for us. And it's like, that's fun because I'm an impacted identity. This is happening to me. I'm talking to other people about it, not speaking for anybody. You know what I mean? It feels very much like the issue is building that community. Community is power. People are power. So if you have something awesome to add, you should add it. I love that for us. I love that for us. I heard from my therapist probably a couple of years ago now. I was talking about my experiences, and he said to me, well, Di, did you know that if your parents meet your needs even 30% of the time, that you will have a healthy attachment to them? Have you heard that before?
I have not heard that statistic, but that statistic does resonate with me. I think it has to be 30% of the time consistently.
Right.
Not 30% of your life.
Right.
And it goes downhill from there. I think it needs to be, 30% of your day or 30% of your week. That it is pretty remarkable because kids are resilient.
Yes.
They're very, very resilient. So 2 things I've learned in my life is that we are wired to be loved.
Yes.
And we're wired for language. So, you don't teach a child English. They pick it up, the speaking that's going on around them. The same can be said of losing a language. So I actually lost Spanish. When I came to live with my mom again, there was no one around, no one speaking Spanish. My mom spoke some broken Spanish, but there were no adult conversations happening around me, so I lost it. And I just think it is a parallel to love, that you can be loved and nurtured But if that is disrupted, you can lose that feeling of love or that feeling of attachment. We are naive. We think, that, well, you're loved.
Yes.
Shut up. I don't care that, you're having a bad day and I don't want to hear about it. You're loved.
Right.
Well,
Right.
that's not really how it
That's
works.
it. Right.
Communicating love and communicating a language is fluid. You can understand more of it or you can lose it.
Absolutely. So this is sort of unrelated, but related in my mind.
Okay.
How do you feel in your identity having lost Spanish? Because I grew up in foster care, I have also lost a lot of my other language abilities. And do you feel like that impacts your identity in the world and how you move in spaces?
Yes and no. So I will tell you, as half Hispanic, so I'm half Mexican, half white. My mom's Slovenian descent. The Hispanic community does not consider you Hispanic if you don't speak Spanish.
That is exactly right. Yep.
And I think it's funny, just being transparent, that some of my Spanish-speaking counterparts have never lived in a Hispanic country. They were, their parents, moved here. They are first-generation Americans. Sure, they speak Spanish, but they've never actually lived in another country. No one knows the exact science on this, but a lot of researchers believe that something like 75 to 80% of your personality is developed by the time you're 3.
Yeah.
Well, I was primarily in Mexico with my Mexican family until I was 3.
Yes.
And so I actually have more of the conservative, family-oriented, fiesta, colorful Mexican personality. Even though my first memories, once I was 3 years old and on, were not in that environment, I am very much wired that way.
Right.
And so for me, that is the true identity of my culture. And I will tell you, that was part of my attachment healing journey. So when I reconnected with my father and went back to Mexico and visited, it was like a breath of fresh air. Like, oh my goodness, this is why I am the way that I am.
Yes.
I mean, things as silly as, and I don't know if all Mexicans do this, but just in my Mexican family, whatever leftovers are left at dinner, they eat for breakfast the next morning, even though it's not breakfast food.
Yep.
I always did that in
in
my mom's family.
Yep.
And nobody else in my mom's family did that. And they would always talk about it. I had no conscious memory of my Mexican family doing that. My personality was developed to do that. And so going back to Mexico, there were all of these little nuances that I had no conscious memory of, and yet I had always done. And so to me, that's where the identity lies. But again, we go back to the bigger issue. I identify as half Mexican, but the rest of the world doesn't.
Yes.
Just I identify as someone who has a voice in the foster community, even though the foster community doesn't. So being the outcast has continued.
Yes. It does not matter who you are technically, what your identity is, what languages you speak. People on the outside of that circle are going to be telling you whether or not you are Hispanic, whether or not you are Latinx, any of those things. It is so funny to me that identity is so informed by the outside, by how other people feel, and what categories they would put you in. That is why I asked. I really appreciate you thinking about it. So,
great question.
Anyway, thank you. I've run into it a lot. I will regularly just have this conversation where people will be like, right, this white lady here. And I'm like, for sure, 100%. Anyway, so how do people follow you? How do they support your work? How do you want people to get in touch with you?
Thank you for asking. So the easiest way is just to go to my website, canyonsandfireworks.com.
Yes.
And from there, there's a link to my Facebook page, my Instagram page, my podcast, guesting, Spotify list, everything you could think of. And of course, it does me so much good if you become a follower of my social media pages and like and comment on things that I post, because that's the name of the game, to give your book a chance at a successful book launch.
Yes.
And just to be completely transparent, I don't care about selling books. I care about people's attachment and
Yes.
the restoration of the nuclear family and marriages and those are the things that I care about. The way I feel that I have to potentially impact those things is through the book.
Right. Right. Publishers always say that selling the book isn't even the thing that informs, the work that you will do. It's just a product, right? And that's always the fun thing, because we come up in the world assuming that the book is the job. The book isn't the job. The book is the door opener. Who's your best client? Who's your best person that you want to speak to about your work?
So for me, my journey started with identity. People don't realize that if you don't have a strong foundation of love, then you don't develop your identity.
Yes.
And so anybody who wants to, grow in their identity is a good person to learn about attachment and to listen to my content.
Absolutely.
Another person who wants to have healthier relationships. So most people don't give a darn about attachment until they start dating, seriously dating in their early 20s, not high school, none of that.
Yeah.
But in their early 20s, when they say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not having the best relationships, it might have something to do with attachment. If not your attachment, the attachment of the people that you're dating.
Absolutely.
And so those are good people. And then, like I said, I really have a heart for the foster and adoptive community. I really want to help kids.
Yes. And if you're a foster kid, like I was a foster kid, y'all, we are not in a position to turn people away from helping us and making sure that our voices are being heard and making sure that we are advancing policies that are helping us and not hindering our survivability in this world. So, think about that. I got to let Rita get back to the awesome work she's doing in the world. If you are interested in working with her or having her on your podcast or having her as a speaker, please do reach out to her. All of those links are going to be in the show notes. So y'all, thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the Indomitable podcast for more incredible stories of humaning. Remember, my new book, Indomitable, A Foster Care Story, is available wherever you get your books. If you have any upcoming events you'd like me to bring the Indomitable experience to, please submit a request via my website at daicerulo.com. And finally, as ever, I am so happy to have you here in community with me. And remember, together we are truly indomitable. Take care and have a great week, everybody.